So if you're new to retreat, it may surprise you the reactions people have to this environment. Meaning, you may notice people next to you falling out, crying, vocalizing, twitching, and obviously that may be happening to you as well. Um, but it's actually, if it's not you that it's happening to in that moment, it's actually an invitation to explore your own reaction to other people's experiences. So, for instance, it's common to hear people crying during a retreat, and that's an opportunity for you to notice your own reaction to that. What is your interpretation of that? Is something in you really wanting to go help them? And if so, why? Is crying something that needs fixed? If someone's feeling emotional release, having tears, feeling sadness, or just undifferentiated emotion, and that looks like a body crying, is that wrong? Does it need fixed? Does it need another human being? Or is it okay just as it is? So when we investigate our own reaction to other people's experiences, it can tell us a lot about how we perceive emotion in ourselves. Is it a problem to be fixed? Is it something we can't handle? Is it something that requires an interaction with another person? Or is it merely an experience of being alive? If we hear someone near us that's restless, moving, whatever, do we feel angry, frustrated, upset, judging? This is an invitation to explore our own perception of what others are doing and how much buy-in we have in the belief that they should be doing or not doing what we think they should be doing or not doing. But why? What is the cost to us when we have a uh, series of beliefs about what others should or should not be doing? Who pays the price when we have a hidden belief that for us to feel settled, relaxed, at peace, okay, others have to act within a narrow range of behaviors. And if they move outside that range, then suddenly we are not at peace. It's a belief, but what is the cost of that belief? Now, all these things I'm talking about, everyone has these types of perceptions or reactions at various times. Doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. It means you're normal, but it's a place to investigate. Sometimes it will lead you to discoveries like being a child, moving around, moving your body very naturally as a child does, as children tend to do, and someone telling you, "Be still, quit moving." Like we've all heard that, right? But why? I see it a lot actually, and it's kind of a little slightly heartbreaking. I see it in grocery stores, and the kid wants to step up on the edge of the cart, get off the cart, and sometimes you have to tell your kids not to do things that are dangerous, but the way you tell them makes a huge difference. I noticed it one time, not too long ago. I was at the grocery store, and there was one mother and one child, and the child, I think, tried to basically stand up on the edge of the cart. And they were old enough that they wouldn't hurt themselves doing it. She was pretty abrasive, actually, like really angry, mean, sort of. The implicit language, the implicit message in the language was, like you're a bad kid. Get off the cart, quit doing that. How many times have I told you? and I could just see the way it affected the child. It was really sad, And then a few minutes later, I saw another mother who reacted in such a different way. It wasn't a reaction. It was just, the child was on the edge of the cart, and she was very sweet, you know, held the child's hand, showed them, here, let's move over here, and if you're up there, you could fall and hurt yourself, because of the interaction and the energy of it, the child wasn't resistant at all, and they didn't even notice their behavior was being corrected or modified. It was there's just no resistance anywhere in it, um, and this just shows me like how easy it is to become unconscious with how we're reacting to those around us with our nonverbal communication, and how the same message, the same exchange, the same situation can be reasonably traumatizing to a child or or an adult, or it can be simple and no big deal at all. But to the degree that we're in our head, we're mind identified, um, we tend to ignore the other aspect. We ignore how we're coming across emotionally or energetically or physically. Um, yeah, so that nonverbal communication, the body cues, the way we move, the way we intone our words, all of that communicates so much all the time. Um, and when we're in that little bit of stable disassociated state of mind identification, we can justify so much, because we can tell ourselves, well, the message is the same, or I apologized, but it doesn't really change the fact that the fundamental communication that may be going on all the time, with people around you, or more than you realize, is actually pretty abrasive, harsh, unkind, and we don't want to see this about ourselves. And part of why we don't want to see it about ourselves is because then we have to work on it, and that's a big, and there's a lot of momentum to it, and there's a lot there, and it's going to take work. Part of it is that, but I actually think part of it's much simpler. Part of it is we've we've actually accepted an identity about ourselves that we're not that kind of person. We're a nice person. This is why I think identities. Um, this may be a bit of an aside, but I think it's relevant. Um, when we talk about when in some circles, uh, like empowering thoughts and using empowering thoughts and things like that is really elevated. I don't talk like that at all. I think it can actually be. There may be a setting in which that can be helpful. I think if you have a lot of um, disempowering types of beliefs and thoughts about yourself, investigating that can be really helpful. On the other hand, the idea that you can just sort of replace one thought with another thought, first of all, it doesn't really work like that. But second of all, adopting quote unquote positive beliefs about yourself probably is more, um, can probably lead to more delusion than examining negative beliefs about yourself, or than having negative beliefs about yourself. Because if you believe you're a good person, or just in a wholesale way, or whatever, you believe you treat people well, and mm, it's a sort of default perception of yourself. Let's say this is always much more dynamic than the way I'm putting it, but I'm simplifying it for this point. But if we have a kind of fixed belief that I just treat people well, I'm a good person, then what happens is if there are moments when you don't, because we all have moments when we are irritable or whatever, right? Then you tend to overlook those, right? Because it would cause a cognitive dissonance to try to experience both of those at the same time. That I am a good person, and yet I really mistreated that person. I said something really unkind to them. And that cognitive dissonance is something that mind identification doesn't like. It likes things to be consistent in the way it perceives reality. Um, so sometimes it's just as simple as recognizing, identities of any kind that are fixed, that are, I am this way, I am that way, I'm not this way, I'm not that way, can be rather distorting depending on what else is going on. So this is why I always suggest investigating beliefs, especially beliefs about yourself. Just investigate them, see if they're true, see if they're always true. And you'll find out none of them are always true. And then at some point you'll find out they're unnecessary completely. Like sometimes when I say I have no beliefs, I think people think I'm being like cute or something. But I mean, I really don't have any beliefs, really. Beliefs can be useful in the relative world, and in fact, practical beliefs are the only ones that are useful. Like driving the speed limit will help you avoid getting a ticket. Like that's probably a reasonably good belief, but it's nothing universal, and it's nothing about me. It has nothing to do with a self. Beliefs about self or you turn out to all be false, all of them. They're not even false. They have no truth value. That's the key. Yeah. So to circle around, this environment has a lot of opportunity, even though we're being very still and silent. We're not interacting with others. We're remaining our own experience. It still has a lot of opportunity, actually, we're disengaging from the constant interaction with others in very stereotyped ways, is what we do, right? Since we're disengaging from that, we have the opportunity to look at subtler reactions we have, tendencies we have. I really want to interact with that person. Why? Why? Are you lonely right now? Are you feeling a little, um, I don't know, restless? And maybe a little bit of restlessness leads you to habitually interact in a certain way with another person. What if you don't? What if you break that spell and stop reacting? Excuse me, stop interacting to avoid restlessness? Maybe that'll show you something really valuable, that actually you can tolerate restlessness. And maybe that even opens to a different kind of experience, a different kind of um, lesson about emotion or lesson about resistance. So this is a wonderful opportunity to investigate um, our habituated beliefs, behavior patterns, relationship models in regards to others. And so much of it is passive, meaning just experiencing it. You don't have to think about it or inquire or do anything with it. Just notice again and again that you don't have to react nearly as much as you think you do to anything. In fact, you don't really have to react to anything, but the first lesson is just seeing, man, I spend my day in reactivity and I didn't even notice it. I spend my day bouncing around, trying to avoid my own internal triggers, but I don't even investigate the triggers. But here you can investigate them and notice most of them aren't there. There is no need to react to anything. And then with that, with non-reactivity, first of all, it frees up a lot of your energy, frees up so much energy, but it also um, starts to instill a sense of equanimity, that it actually feels good not to react to things all the time. It feels far more natural than to react, than to bounce around, trying to put out fires, trying to make sure people see you the way you want them to see you, trying to make sure everyone around you is comfortable, whatever your game is, or just staying busy. It's a huge one in this country and in the West and in the East. In modern world, it's so ubiquitous to just remain busy. And if you're not busy, remain sort of partially passively engaged with screens. Keep the mind busy. Um, when we're here, we have the opportunity to see what happens when we just don't do that. We don't remain busy. What is revealed when we don't constantly occupy ourselves with something, some stimulation, some interaction. And then we often will start to, that calms down, once we see that we're not reacting really, because we kind of can't in this environment so much. We might try to internally react, but that'll calm down too. So we see that we're not really reacting that much, or reacting far less. And then, as I mentioned, something else is revealed, something that we know is always there at some level, but we overlook it. And then we have the opportunity to investigate why. What is the relationship between that which we overlook actively much of the time and all of the activities we use to overlook it? What is the relationship there? Is it causal? Is it just happenstance? I would suggest it's causal in the sense that it's not that just that we obscure, let's call it our true nature, through distraction and unnecessary activity or, mm, I don't know, non fruitful activity, distractions, even addictions. So I don't think it's just happenstance that we do that, and then that just kind of results in us avoiding uh, recognition of our true nature ongoing. I think it's causal. I think we may you may find when you have the opportunity that we're actually, for some reason, for various reasons, we're actually afraid to turn to our true nature, or the conditioned way we experience ourself is afraid, um, or it the conditioned way we experience ourself and our mind and our the world we see and all, it suggests that we should be afraid. I think that's the most accurate way I can say it. Um, and then we can look into that. Well, why are we afraid? Why are we afraid of coming into direct contact with our true nature habitually? I mean, everyone's here because they're interested in coming into contact with their true nature, living truth, and they recognize that to habitually turn away from it is suffering, and it is. That's why suffering is grace, because it reminds you, hey, you're turning away from something that's there that you could potentially turn toward, right? So everyone here has that prompting, of course, or we wouldn't be here. And yet we can find that there's a discord between our deepest yearning and our behavior, or our deepest yearning and our conditioned responses, you know. And this is where I think sort of spiritual traditions, like say a Buddhist tradition, say a Zen tradition, where it kind of shines because it acknowledges that outright. It just says, yeah, you're your own worst enemy in this way. Almost everything you do is self-centered, delusion-based activities. That's a message that doesn't go well. It doesn't go over well in our today's society. It just doesn't. It doesn't. It's a total mismatch, but it makes sense in the tradition, and it's also kind of true. So turns out to be true. So Zen shines in that way, and if you're crazy enough to buy into that, and you do what Kogan did and sit in a monastery for many years, um, the mere act of recognizing that and not reacting and sitting some more and sitting some more and sitting some more will erode those tendencies to act in, in some sense selfish ways, but in some sense just unnecessarily, um, just in unnecessary ways, and unnecessarily burning up our own energy to run from something that is just here all the time. It's insane. Um, so so there's an intelligence in just sitting in this way, um, into giving yourself to something that really is not only beyond you, uh, but to giving yourself to something that really doesn't necessarily acknowledge the you that you think you are as such, because it doesn't acknowledge all of what you think you need: comfort, secure, certain kinds of security, um, all of the pacification of interactions, with people. Although, of course, in monastic traditions and situations, there you have plenty of interactions, but a lot of your day, and certainly during retreats, is in silent sitting and in silence and in pretty rigid practice in a sense. So it really starts to break that spell of clinging, of unnecessary movement and communication and self-centered behaviors and distractions. Like so much of that is eliminated in these kinds of environments, which is great. But the ego, is so clever, so adaptable that it can easily live in that environment too. Can and um, So what we're doing here is maybe a fusion in a way. Spending a week like this does have that effect. It breaks the spell of those habituated patterns, the stereotyped patterns, the conditioned patterns of interaction, of belief, of thought, of behavior, of distraction. We can break that spell collectively here together. And what I try to fuse together with this and go directly after the insight. You have to do that. You have to do that. And interestingly, that's a hard one to teach. It's hard to institutionalize even in sort of a retreat. I'm sorry, like a tradition, like I'm talking about Zen tradition. Um, there are in Zen specifically, there are Rinzai specifically, there are very direct practices that actually do try to go after this. Certainly the approach to Kensho or First Awakening is is sort of structured and institutionalized, and it actually works, I think, reasonably well. But again, if the practitioner isn't truly sincere, you can easily dodge that. And but I think even after that, the deeper nuances of how to get at all the ego structures and the self structures can be tricky even in that environment. Um, so yeah, it's hard to institutionalize or structure the second aspect that's really important, and that is that you as an individual have to be willing to do the act of turning inward. You have to be willing to go beyond yourself or go beyond what you think you are. If that ingredient's not in there, then it doesn't matter what environment your body's in. No matter how austere it is, you could be a fakir standing on one foot for a year potentially and not wake up. I don't know. I mean, it doesn't, like I've said before, if extreme environments and pushing yourself to the extreme and enduring a lot of pain and sacrifice, if that equaled awakening, then every, ultra marathoner would be awake, right? That's an extreme that most of us will never push our bodies to, or our comfort, go beyond our comfort in that way. So this isn't just about being uncomfortable either, right? Um, it's about something far more subtle, far more personal, and actually far more revolutionary, truly. And that is to recognize, however that happens, through grace, through suffering, to recognize that what you take yourself to be is not what you are, or what you take yourself to be is sus for any Gen Zs out there. I try to use that word every once in a while, to stay relevant. uh, um, what you take yourself to be is something about it that's just not quite right. You have to go beyond yourself. There's something in you knows that, right? That's that second ingredient. We can create all the retreats we want and all the austere environments we want, but without that, nothing happens really. It can. It can. I've seen it happen. I've seen it's pretty rare to be honest, but people do sometimes wake up completely out of the blue, and it's not fun for them, and it's really destabilizing and very confusing and challenging and all of it. But that's quite rare. I think the vast majority of people have some intuition about this, some orientation to it, whether it's through, you know, Buddhism, traditional Dharma, pragmatic Dharma, Christian mysticism, who knows what. Many people have, it's interesting, the more I just kind of am in this space, I guess, people contact me more and more. And I find these people who figure these things out in the most obscure places and ways that don't really get too much traction, but they're definitely there, like Douglas Harding, right? The Headless Way. I can't think of the source of it, but Daniel Schmidt, who has his awakening center, and he does the dyad thing where it's very simple. You sit with another person and stare at them and say, "Tell me who you are," and that's all you say, and then they have to say something, and you do that for hour after hour after hour, and he has a reasonably good success rate of people having shifts doing that. But when I interviewed him, he said someone had actually, he didn't come up with that. Someone came up with it years and years and years ago, and he read about it or something, and he thought, wow, you try that, and it worked really well. So people, the stuff comes to people somehow, and maybe many of them just don't get traction. They're not, they don't have a spiritual, I don't know, platform or whatever. And so this pops up in a lot of places and ways and with different people and different traditions and non-traditions. So it's available, of course, to everyone, and it's a little It's a little funny how it pops up and when it pops up and when it doesn't and so forth. But there is that ingredient that you really want to know truth, but not in an intellectual way, and you suspect that something about your own identity or what you're taking yourself to be is the key. That's a very simple statement, but I find it to be pretty much the case. And with that, if that's there and if it's strong enough, actually, or maybe you cultivate it enough, or you keep going there, then actually the environment, whether it's a retreat setting or a monastic life or whatever, is actually pretty secondary because I do see people wake up in all kinds of spaces. In certainly people wake up in traditional monastic life. People wake up in householder life, which is everything else from that paradigm. But people who have small children, people who are very busy, people who are wealthy, people who are poor, people who every age, every gen, all of it. I've seen it again and again, and it could be anybody. Also, people with a lot of resistance, people with a lot of doubt, sometimes they just wake up. People who just happen to be filming me and don't aren't that interested in this space before they met me, um, but they're good, videographers, and so it's so weird the way it just does this, um, and so that's really to me the key is um, that sort of gosh, it's not I can't give it a word because it's not a yearning really. You're not yearning for something. It's a combination of just recognizing the suffering, or the something's not quite right. Even if you don't call it suffering, it's something's not quite right with the way I'm experiencing reality, uh, and the intuition that I have to go beyond what I take myself to be, my own perception of myself. Something about that is the key. That's great. If you have that, um, then it's more a matter of you know couple things turning toward it, however that happens, resting back into it, taking the backward step. We have all these ways of speaking about it, but it's not speakable. So that's certainly part of it. Um, and another part of it is recognizing the obstructions as they come up and seeing that sometimes those obstructions, or let's just say the ego, can kind of disguise itself when it's more like an emotional repression or something else going on that can be disguised as your drive to wake up too. It can kind of it's co-opting is the word for it. So you can have a very sincere drive or desire to go beyond yourself or to touch, you know, into undifferentiated reality. And at the same time, there's a kind of competing agenda. I think I talked about this yesterday. It can be kind of a competing agenda, uh, and one way or another, it's a form of fear. It's a form of fear. Fear is interesting in this space because it disguises itself really well sometimes. And this one of the biggest places that I see this actually um, is people who have a very keen intellectual interest and understanding in all of this, even in like pragmatic Dharma circles online and so forth. Like, they know they can say what I'm going to say better than I can say it. Maybe they know all the words and the terms and the history and the Dzogchen and Zen and stages of enlightenment. They've been on the line of all the forums, um, but it's still remaining intellectual. And um, sometimes in that space, you can convince yourself that you do have insight even though you really have intellectual insight. And other times it's like more of a frustration. Like I know all this stuff and I know I keep reading about it and I know that about myself, but I don't know how to cross over or whatever. And I think in either case, it's really fear. It's fear of that key component I was talking about of going beyond yourself. So going beyond yourself means going beyond what you think you are, which means going beyond what you think everything is, what you think the world is, what you think spirituality is. All of that you're kind of using to comfort yourself in some way. You're using to orient yourself. Isn't that weird? Everything you can learn everything about spirituality and everything about awakening and realization and all of it. You can learn about that and use that knowledge of awakening to literally not wake up. I know it's crazy, but I mean, I really see it happen, and but it's because it feels like an extension of you. That's the key. You have to see that that feels like an extension of you. It's more of the same. More using knowledge to stabilize myself, using knowledge to feel like I've got a handle on life, on reality. If you think you've got a handle on reality, um, I won't say it's impossible, but it makes it harder to start to recognize that which you know you don't have a handle on, and actually want to orient toward it, because you don't have a handle on what's coming before awakening. You can't. It's not that kind of thing. It's just so beyond. Um, so how to help more, I mean, this is all I do, is how to help people walk one more step, one a little closer to the edge, and there's the themes keep coming up. There's a component of trust for sure. And it's kind of nuts. What do you trust when it's ineffable? What are you actually trusting when I tell you it's beyond your idea of awakening, it's beyond your idea of God, it's beyond your idea of Buddha, it's beyond your idea of every stage of enlightenment you've read about. It's just beyond all that. So how do you trust that which is ineffable? And I can't tell you how to do that. All I can tell you is it's trustable. Maybe that's all I ever do. Maybe that's why I have the job I have of doing this, or something, that I can actually tell you through experience it's trustable. And Violet can tell you it's trustable, and Chris can tell you it's trustable, and Kogan and Chad. We can tell you it's trustable, but I cannot give you proof. The proof is the act of surrender on your part. Because proof wouldn't make sense, right? It would be more thoughts, more concepts. Partially, I think it's helpful to investigate why our default is not to trust. Why is our default not to trust? And that has to do with egos and the other humans, and realizing that much of what we do when we interact with other people, and how we interact with knowledge, at least some of it for sure, maybe a lot of it, is kind of based in something that feels inauthentic to us. Feels like it's about fitting in. It's about learning to be the right kind of human and a good human and succeeding and all that. But it's also inauthentic in some way. Someone came up, and I love the question. It was a great question. I've reflected on it a couple times since we had the conversation, but during Q&A, and just said, what to do with imposter syndrome? And that's exactly what I'm talking about. It's imposter syndrome it feels super personal, like I'm faking something, but it's not a personal thing. It's a collective experience of a recognition of inauthenticity. There's some level of inauthenticity with mind identification and collective mind identification. So to feel like an imposter is good, because at least you're acknowledging the delusion. You're acknowledging the fakery that we engage ourselves in, right? So when you realize that, as much as your parents loved you, as much as your partner loves you, as much as people do care about you to some degree, there's also something not fully congruent and authentic with that, with all those things we stabilize ourselves with, because we can feel their own doubt, we can feel their own self-judgment. We've adopted their self-judgment inwardly in ourselves. So we're all kind of in this suffering mass, sometimes pretending we're not suffering, faking it. That's inauthentic, right? And inauthenticity is actually rewarded by society. Certainly rewarded on social media, right? So yeah, all of that going on, whether it's really obvious and overt and you think about it or talk about it like I do, or whether you just feel it, something just a little off with the whole collective human paradigm, the social matrix. Yeah, with that, and you're identified as a human, that's a key component, and you're identified as a member of that, then of course then trust is gonna be an issue, right? So yeah, maybe that's the default. That's why we don't just naturally trust, right? Because like animals trust, they just do what they need to do. They act completely spontaneous, right? But we don't. We default to not trusting. So maybe that's a component of how do you get to the place of trust I'm talking about. to trust, to let go into something beyond you, which will bring you through fear at one point or another. It will bring you through some form of fear. It just will, because it is the unknown. You are walking into the unknown, or you're letting the unknown overtake everything in that moment. So there is, I think, something else you can. That's sort of the negative aspect. Negative meaning seeing what is um, undermining trust, or looking backward and saying, well, wait a minute, why don't I trust in the first place? That's negative, not in a judgmental way, just negative in what's actually maybe preventing. The positive way of looking at it, or what you can do when you look at this and you look into the abyss and you say to yourself, why the hell would I want to go there? Like, that's the unknown. I don't know that. It's beyond, again, this is beyond your ideas of spirituality, everything you know about it. It's just beyond all of it. And you know it when you feel it. Why would I want to go there? Why would I want to step into that? So the positive side of thing, or the what you can quote unquote do about it, um, is just keep touching into it little by little. Trust your instinct that there's something here. Trust your instinct that there's a reason you came here. Trust your instinct that there's a reason that you inquire. Trust your instinct that there's a reason that some part of you wants to surrender. You just don't know how. And even though I'll call it a moment, like a quanta of touching in to your true nature, even though they can be so fleeting, often you may not even know it happened, but it did happen, and it does matter, and it does have an effect. And that this I'm sure of. There's it's a kind of cumulative effect. Not that it's not like you get a little bit of enlightenment and then a little more, and it all builds up to like one big enlightenment. That's not what I mean. The cumulative effect is, um, the more you touch into it, the more what you take yourself to be, let's just say your conscious experience right now, the more that recognizes itself as that, let's say. And the more that happens, um, it's as if that just comes forward more. Those moments, or those um, portals, or those moments of experience just overtaking. They just become a little more frequent, more obvious, and you just attune to them more. And with that, maybe there's a sort of familiarity, even though it's a different kind of familiarity. Then I think you do start to trust it more. You start to trust it, uh, and there's a kind of magic thing that happens with this. that's it's like comfortable, uncomfortable. Where the more you touch into that, the more you have a different kind of perspective, a sort of almost like transcendent perspective in a sense. And what that does is it shines a lot more light on the suffering. It shows you like, oh my God, that way was really painful. That way of distraction, that way of delusion, that way of self pacification with thought, that was really the way of seeking. That was really painful, actually. So the more you touch in here, the more that is illuminated. That that's uncomfortable to try to, uphold an identity in the mind that's based in time and separation. So that does help. So yeah, I really think, if I could say there's one thing to do, it's expose yourself to the unknown, uh, and that happens in spades in places like this, in a retreat setting. Um, Read what resonates with you, watch who resonates with you, and if you can, interact with somebody who can really reflect your infinite nature, or the nature that is undivided, that is unbound, that is not perceiving itself as a discrete self, because it's not perceiving itself as anything at all. When we did the observatory experience, and I apologize to anyone here who didn't get to do it. If we have it next year, which I think we probably will, I can't guarantee it, but anyone who didn't get it but was here, you'll be first on the list next year. Anyway, but I did it, and one of the people who did it next to me, when we got done with it, we were walking away, and he said, we're not supposed to talk or whatever, but he was so amazed by it. He just nudged me and he said, I always thought I was perceiving from here. He's like, I'm seeing from here, but it's like now the seeing is everywhere. Is that right? And I said, that's right. He was like, whoa, he's seeing it. He's just like, what the hell? Yeah. It becomes so natural that you overlook how big of a deal it is when you didn't used to see that way. But yeah, it sounds so much like a superpower if you say it this way, but it's not exactly how it sounds. But it is kind of like seeing from everywhere at once, but it's also seeing from nowhere. It's seeing that seeing is not a directional experience. Seeing is not a discrete experience. It's not a defined experience. It's not an experience, but it's thoroughly non-dualistic. What is seen is as much you or more you in a way than what you would take to be you if you're thinking about yourself as a seer. It's very intimate. In one way of speaking, it's the end of violence, because to harm anything is to harm yourself, and to harm anyone else, you feel it so intimately. Things just feel so different. That doesn't mean, and this is a little counterintuitive, but even with non-dual realization, it doesn't mean that you never have selfish habits anymore. They will still be there because the body mind has momentum, but they'll be very uncomfortable, and they will correct themselves very quickly, or much more quickly. Yeah, it's literally like harming yourself. You know it, you feel it that way. This is, there's sort of benefits and downsides to all different ways of going about this, or how this plays out in your life and so forth. But this is one huge benefit, probably, I would say, of the monastic traditions, that once this comes online, you're so used to aligning yourself with um, generosity, with doing just to do, with giving yourself to the moment, and to the act, and to the chanting, and to the sitting, and to the charitable work or whatever you're doing. um, the behaviors have already largely been aligned with what you're going to realize, which is really cool. Actually, it can be really, really difficult to be a sort of householder, wake up very, very quickly. It's a non-dual specifically, and all your habits are still there. All your painfully self-centered behavior patterns, thought patterns are there. Um, it's a huge rewiring project that you don't have a choice about, and it can be exquisitely uncomfortable. Really, really intense shadow work that'll happen, but it's fine. Turns out okay. But I can't overstate how uncomfortable that is for people to go through. So a lot of people are like, I want to wake up really fast. Like, you might not. You actually don't. You can't want to wake up fast. You can think you want to wake up fast, but going through it is never comfortable. It's the steep path is very uncomfortable. It's okay. It turns out okay, and but the transition can be brutal, because we're a collection of self-centered behaviors, beliefs, and thoughts. That's what we are when we're a mind-identified human. And there are karmic differences, maybe, or just personal differences. Some people are very heart-based already, but I think they're a little more on the rare side, that are thoroughly non-selfish. To see a thoroughly non-selfish person in this world is reasonably uncommon. We're all a little bit selfish, but the beauty of it is this works out how it needs to for you. It'll work out perfectly in your life and your experience and your conditions, and you go through the way you go through. You find your own way through this. That's the beauty of it. Yeah. And you'll have something super unique, very unique to offer, but you can't know what that's going to look like. It may not be your preconceived idea. Like what I mean is literally, it may not be that. You may be a musician and think, once I wake up, I'll be able to bring my music to the world in a different way. You might, but you might not. It may not be that. And I've seen that disillusion people as well. You know, our preconceived ideas about what I think I am now and what how important I think I am to the world and what way I can offer myself to the world may align later on with the spontaneous natural movement after realization, but it may not. You don't know that, but it will work. You know, the more you give yourself to it, the more, and it will surprise you how well it works actually. But you're gonna have to let go of your ideas about yourself, all of them, every one of them, and that's really good news. You'll be so much happier without all your beliefs about yourself and about time and about control and about a realization.